Donc, la prochaine présentation est celle de Cynthia Maria Rodrigues Blanco, qui, à moins que ça n'ait changé depuis, aura la particularité qu'elle sera prononcée en anglais. Donc, le visuel qu'elle nous a préparé devrait être, quant à lui, en français d'après moi et nous permettra de bien suivre. S'il y a des incertitudes, elles pourront être levées, bien sûr, au moment des questions. Donc, notre prochaine intervenante est impliquée au sein de la Chaire de recherche du Canada en gestion et économie de l'innovation en Polytechnique Montréal. Elle détient un baccalauréat en météorologie, une maîtrise en sciences de l'Université de Sao Paulo et un MBA en gestion stratégique de la science et de la technologie. Ses recherches concernent de façon prioritaire les politiques publiques, la structuration des problèmes, la mégascience, ainsi que la planification, la surveillance et la gestion en sciences et technologies. Sa communication d'aujourd'hui a pour titre « Taxonomie et cadre proposés pour soutenir la prise de décision des grands investissements scientifiques ». Alors, Cynthia, est-ce que tu m'entends bien? Tu nous vois, je crois? Parfait. Donc, dès que tu es prête, je t'invite à partager ton écran. Et de mon côté, je désactive mon son. Comme pour les autres présentations en ligne, lorsqu'on atteindra la barre des 15 minutes, j'envoie un petit message dans le clavardage qui dit qu'il reste 5 minutes ou l'équivalent.
Bien, bonjour. Merci pour l'opportunité de présenter ma recherche du doctorat intitulée Taxonomie et cadre proposés pour soutenir la prise de décision des grands investissements scientifiques. Je suivrai ce plan en me concentrant sur les principaux résultats, mais ne les présentant pas en détail en raison de limites de temps. Je présenterai une brève introduction au sujet, les résultats concernant les objectifs de la recherche et enfin la conclusion. Mais je vais le présenter en anglais parce que mon français, c'est un travail en progrès. Well, let's get started. Big science has always attracted society's attention and triggered people's imagination. It is scientists' dreams come true, but also politicians' nightmares. It is source of remarkable inventions, innovations, and knowledge advancements. For me, a Brazilian civil servant, Big Science appeared in 2012 as one of my analyst's tasks to support government decision makers to choose in which big science project to invest. That was, and it still is, a complex task for government analysts worldwide to support such decisions. So far, there are few proposed solutions to that, and they did not act directly in the decision process, but regard planning or evaluation. And more than this, apart from conflicting situations between big science stakeholders that are not rare, one important aspect is that scientific and industrial communities, as well as government technical analysts, claim about a more transparent, informed, structured, evidence-based decision-making process on big science investments. Thus, our motivation is to respond to this demand regarding big science projects, to fund or not to fund. That is the million, sometimes billion-dollar question. So our primary objective emerges to propose a framework for the government decision-making process of big science investments to support national governments to improve their capacity in making informed and structured decisions with the participation of the scientific and industrial communities. And more, another innovative aspect of this goal is to propose a framework that is robust, that works with any civil big science project proposal and customizable to any high-level government decision maker or group of top decision makers demanding a high-quality decision. It is also important to reinforce that this work applies for any civilian big science project, and we do not consider military initiatives. To achieve that, we needed to solve other problems translated into secondary goals. Build an appropriate taxonomy of big science based on research fields and a workable and comprehensive definition of big science. Structure the decision problem of government big science investments that has never been done before, and then identify government decision makers' values, preference, and criteria related to big science investments. With this in hand, we could reach our main goal. To do so, we conducted this exploratory research based on white and gray literature and empirical observations with exclusive 50 interviews with a selected group of big science high-level stakeholders. And then we employed a progressively focusing approach encompassing qualitative and quantitative methods in three-phase data analysis. In the first phase, phase A, the analysis focuses on the macro level and works on the taxonomy of big science using the qualitative meta-synthesis of the literature, and then works on the definition of big science using the previous results and the systematic inductive approach analysis of one interview's question. In the second phase, phase B, the analysis goes down to the meso level and develops an in-depth problem structuring analysis with the interviews and applying the strategic options development and analysis, the SODA method. In the third phase, phase C, the analysis feeds the micro level and builds the decision aid model using all data and previous results with the multi-criteria analysis. Finally, all findings are logically integrated into a decision support framework for funding big science investments. In the first phase, solving the first secondary goal, we filled a gap of the literature regarding a big science taxonomy by research fields, much more appropriate to government purposes. The qualitative meta-synthesis of the literature resulted in 14 dimensions, such as complex scientific questions, facility type, money required, or non-scientific potential impact, characterizing big science in different knowledge domains. Those domains were inspired by the Ford classification of the Frascati manual. Here, the proposed taxonomy is presented in text format, highlighting, for example, the last one, the research infrastructure category. That is not a research field, but a term increasingly used and studied in the literature. And for our taxonomy, it is an important big science type. The graphical format provides a whole picture of present-day big science family with very fuzzy borders. The boundary of big science may vary considerably across disciplines, involved stakeholders and contexts, as well as over time. The proposed taxonomy shows in detail that big science now is a term that covers everything, from extensive research facilities to international networks of researchers under umbrella projects that do not require any structure at all other than basic laboratories. Such information could prove valuable for the government for distinguishing big science from other research initiatives, allowing them to follow an appropriate funding process under government analysis. And then, filling another gap in the literature, now regarding a workable definition of big science for government purposes, we aggregated and synthesized the previous results of the taxonomy to all fields and complemented with the systematic inductive approach analysis of the answers to the question, what is big science? From the interviews. On that occasion, we could find out the big science concept from industrial and government perspectives, besides the scientific community. Integrating all this information, we reached a big science definition in a ticking box format with 3 groups of requirements, being 2 of them mandatories. Such information could prove also valuable for the government when elaborating documents for national strategies, policies, or even calls for funding. In the second phase, working on the secondary goal, we developed an in-depth problem structure analysis based on the interviews and applying the SODA method. That resulted in this final aggregated map, a chaos at first sight, but it's not a chaos. This map with 73 constructs allows to describe and solve the big science investment problem from the stakeholders' point of view. In the third phase, working on the third secondary goal, we applied the multi-criteria decision analysis to all previous results and developed a multi-criteria aid model, identifying government decision makers' values, preference, and attributes related to big science investments. This exercise resulted in this hierarchical structure model for government, civil, big science investments with 5 attributes and respective criteria. And finally, we reach the main goal, the main result of the research, the decision support framework. Constituted of 5 phases. Phase 1 is the proposal pre-selection. Phase 2, the systematic guidelines to elaborate a final big science project proposal, no matter the research field. Phase 3 marks the final proposal development process. Phase 4 comes with the core phase of the framework, the analysis and assessment. And finally, in the end, phase 5, the Big Science Index, when the results of the multi-criteria model turn into an easy, workable tool to government decision makers towards an evidence-based decision of big science investments, transforming the results into an index. This new index is suitable for the government recommendation and facilitates the understanding of decision makers who do not have specific knowledge regarding the technical aspects involved. It helps the decision maker to identify when the big science project under consideration is a good alternative of investment or not. Finally, the conclusion. Well, we developed This research motivated by the challenge to contribute to a comprehensive solution to meet scientific and industrial communities' claims about a more transparent and evidence-based decision-making process on big science investments, as well as to help the government to do so. In this task, we reached quite original conclusions. The first, Hidenur, 1947, is the first appearance of the term big science in the literature. Contemporary big science is beyond traditional big science that only considers physics and now encompasses all research fields. Proposed big science taxonomy and definition suitable for government funding, oversight, and evaluation. The prime cause of big science funding problem come from its nature in exploring cutting-edge topics. It's not a money problem. We also found 4 main strategic options for the big science funding problem solution. Government decision in big science investments is a compensatory process among the 5 attributes: scientific, technological, social, economic, and political. One of the strategies to solve the problem led to a customizable framework to assure an objective government decision-making process of big science investments, and a proposed big science index to help the government decision maker. New answers bring new questions, but before that, we are working on one article for each finding. So one for the taxonomy, other for the problem structuring, and other for the framework. Bien, c'est ça. Je vais remercier le CIRST pour son soutien généreux, notamment par les bourses des fonds de rédaction du doctorat. Et aussi, merci beaucoup pour votre attention.
Alors, merci beaucoup, Cynthia, pour cette présentation. Je vous rassure, hein, d'ailleurs, votre français, si c'est un travail in progress, il progresse très bien. On vous comprend tout à fait et c'est tout à fait heureux de vous entendre. Donc, j'inviterai les gens, comme d'habitude, en ligne à poser des questions s'il y en a qui proviennent de la salle Zoom. Donc, on a un petit 5 minutes réservé pour ça. Sinon, en salle, je regarde à la fois sur l'écran, un œil à l'écran et un œil dans la salle pour les questions qui pourraient survenir. Oui, j'en ai une ici. Alors, vas-y, Laurence.
Est-ce que ça va en français ou vous préférez en anglais?
En anglais.
It's very close to my personal research project in many ways. I'm very interested to understand what drove that analysis, because is it because you identified examples of investments that were not appropriate for big science, or is it because the money is tight, so you need to really be accurate in your choices? What drove that study, and how it can help? Well, obviously, I will read your articles first, but I'm really curious to see what drove that study, that big study you went through to help decision making. Is it clear, or?
No, the communication is not the best one. If you could repeat, or Jean, if you could please make a brief.
Approcher un peu pour bien capter.
Merci beaucoup.
Yes, what was the purpose of the study? Is it because the money is going down for big science, or is it because there were examples of failure or things that didn't work well? What was the driver of your study?
Oh, I got you. Well, the driver were both. The money is becoming short for big science, but I can say that especially for Brazil, because in other countries like China or even in the European Union, they are increasing their investments in big science projects. So this was my very first driver, was my work and the problematic that we have in South America in special. And that's why I was looking for a way to improve the decision-making process, because this is something that I experience in everyday work. So that was my great inspiration. Eventually, I was the one who needs the most the answers.
Thank you.
Bien, merci pour la
Thank
réponse.
you.
Merci Laurence de t'être approchée. Je pense qu'il y a aussi un effet d'écho dans la salle qui n'aide pas. Donc, est-ce que quelqu'un en ligne aimerait poser une question à son tour? Oui, j'en ai une autre ici en salle. François has a question for you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Compared to Laurence, this is really far from what I'm doing. And so my question is, so as you just said, you're motivated to improve decision making. I guess that these models could also be bad for decision making. It could have like an adverse effect. And I wonder what is like a process of validation to decide whether a framework like yours is improving or is not improving decision making.
I see. Good question. Thank you. The first indicator of getting a better process is that the process is structured. I mean, it is rational. The rationality of the choice is more than personal, is more than make the scientific community happy, but it's something that see the systematic context and make the best choice in a sense that there are very clear criteria that is considered, and the decision maker can justify the choice. Usually when we have, especially when we are dealing with big money, we are talking about billions, in general, billions of dollars, and great part of this money is from the taxpayers. It's from the government. It's a very risky investment. So to make a better accountability of the taxpayers' money, it's mandatory, almost mandatory, to have a decision process that is justifiable with a clear criteria. It must be a clear game for all the players. And that's why, so a way to see that happening is to see if the government is capable of justify the investment to all the stakeholders and to all society. Not only because he wants or she wants. It's not a personal decision, because sometimes it seems like that, but it's a decision almost scientific. If the government is able to justify clearly the criteria to choose something, to choose a big science project and make all the accountability in a clear way, this would be a very good indicator of the improvement of the process and the use of this kind of framework.
Merci.
It's a difficult task.
Merci, Cynthia, pour la réponse, pour l'interaction. Je prendrai une dernière question. Il y a celle de Mathieu ici qui a une question.
Well, it's in the continuation of François. So there's this index that has the objective of being objective, but it's so to get accountability. But what have you considered on the other? Where there, at least in my sense, there's another way of addressing the problem that you're posing about decision, is to separate the pot of money from the elected officials. So give the decision to an agency that would do its decision based on criteria, and the elected officials don't do anything but give a chunk of money to that agency, and the agency parses up the project based on merit.
Sure, thank you for the observation. Yes, it's true. But let's talk about Canada, for example. When a project has a budget greater than $100 million, it's the agents, like the, I forgot the name, is the, oh, sorry, I just forgot the name now, but what happens is that they take a complete different process of decision because it's too much money for just one agency. And it's a strategic decision that is mandatory to encompass decision makers in a very high level, something like cabinet level. So that's why big science, they need to, first of all, identify if the project is a big science project or not. And it's not only a matter of money, because it depends on the research field. Identifying that the big science, the project, the proposed project is a big science, it's necessary to have a different flow in the government analysis, because it's too much responsibility and too much money for only one agency. So Canada, for example, has something like that. And Europe has another way to treat projects that are too expensive. And well, in Brazil, we are still working on this subject, but that's the point. Yes, for sure, would have another way, but the problem is the scale of the project. And that's why even in Canada or in Europe or US is a very different actor, but those two, I can assure you that no agents assume the responsibility to the project.
Merci beaucoup, Cynthia, pour cette dernière réponse. Donc, ce sera la dernière question qu'on aura pris pour cette intervention. Merci encore une fois.